lucky to have a zoo. Maybe you could, about 3 miles away, wasn't it, Dave? And they got quite a lot of chimpanzees and a great big silverback gorilla there.
Probably not even that far away because we're in Manor Farmhouse at the time, weren't we?
Yes, yeah, before we moved to the bigger
So
building, yeah.
I think you could walk to the zoo
You could,
from.
probably could. But we would go there and we would just film some of the animals and get reference material and try and make this character, this 3D, really primitive looking Donkey Kong, when you compare it to what he looks like now, to move like the characters at the zoo. And because it wasn't, you didn't have to worry about left leg forwards, right leg forwards, and draw that and then do an in between. You drew so many poses and it worked out all of the 3D motion between. It was great because it suddenly looked less like stop motion and more like something that was actually living, you know. So it was. I was stunned when they said, "You, Kev." Well, I think I was expecting Tim to redesign it anyway, and he just came in and gave me the faxes, which I've actually still got here. And I think I put a couple of them on a video a little while ago on YouTube. And I just couldn't believe I'd got this sketches of the old DK character. And you want to let me loose on this? Have you seen what I did to WrestleMania? You know, it's. But yeah, he liked it. I think my art skills were greatly enhanced by the 3D technology. But he still liked that.
Actually, I do have a question for you about that. So, you know, you mentioned how good the effect looked on a CRT, right? And you know, it does occur to me that the CRT with the composite video signal and all that, you know, adds a certain amount of, you know, depth, I think, to the tiles. And I guess my question is, when you see Donkey Kong Country on, like, you know, a screenshot, a really clean screenshot from an emulator, or like, you know, like a current version released, is that your art? Or, you know, do you write, or is it, you know, is it being seen in a way that you wouldn't prefer it to be seen?
Yeah, I think whenever I play, I like to see like a CRT filter or something like that because of the nostalgia. But whenever we were drawing our artwork on, I mean, we wanted SCART, and all those years ago we wanted nothing more than having a super clean image on your screen. And when I was playing Sonic and I had a Mega Drive and you connected up with the SCART lead onto my big TV at the time, it looked great because it was nice and crisp. I mean, still, you compare that today, it's not crisp at all. There's still a slight blur around the edges. But when you look at pixel perfect stuff now and you see these, every single pixel and every single flaw, because the characters were generated rather than drawn. So we didn't go over and we might have cleaned up the odd thing if something maybe have intersected. You know, if an arm might have intersected something else on a stationary pose, and we might have cleaned it up, because when you were drawing the graphics by hand, you would always be really meticulous about making sure that the shading followed the same contour. And there's a bit of an art to that when you get into the 16-bit. You know, some of Capcom's artwork and SNK stuff on the Neo Geo, it's just beautiful. It's really well drawn, and they'll shade everything really well. But this took care of all of that for you automatically. But what we used to do when we were drawing it on the drawing board, we'd have a great big piece of paper and we'd draw everything with a pen and a piece of paper and pen, pencil, and we would scratch out our mistakes with a scalpel, and then we'd box it all off, and we'd have to decode it and take that disc to somebody and put it. You'd be sitting there, you'd be drawing it, but you'd be doing this with your eyes, screwing your eyes up to try and simulate what it looked like on a CRT screen. And so, sorry about that. The sorry, parents.
Leave that in, editor.
Yeah.
That was gold.
Lost my train of thought there. You're trying to simulate this CRT screen, and we should have issued these fogged up glasses or something. When you look at them now, you see what you actually drew, or what actually was generated by the little algorithm which reduced the amount of colors. Whereas, had we got the time to, you'd have gone through every frame and cleaned up every little bit and made sure the shading was nice. But you didn't need to when it was all moving. And like you say, when you see it on a big screen, pixel for pixel, it wasn't intended to look that. It was meant to have the slight blur and
It just felt that blur.
the overly illuminated pixels, and so it just looked great on those systems. Pixel art is, say, it is an art form, I think, and you've got to make sure that everything is falling into place. Whereas this was kind of a conversion process to create 3D into 2D.
Before we move away from Donkey Kong Country, I do want to read a headline from a website called The Hard Times, which is sort of a parody news site, kind of like The Onion. And the headline of this article is, "Man tasked with making score for a monkey riding a swordfish underwater creates transcendent piece of music."
I've seen that headline before. They're being very generous.
No, it was a remarkable score. I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but I do think of Donkey Kong Country as being sort of a highlight of your musical career, at least for my tastes.
I think it worked out quite well. I think some of the reason was they were doing these amazing things with the graphics. If you go back to when they were generating those graphics, everything that had come before, though it looked nice, it was still very 2D. By comparison, when they did that test for the fighting game that they showed to Nintendo, it was chalk and cheese. It was almost as though you could actually pick these characters out of the screen and hold them in your hands. It was such a big difference. And I was aware that the music was going to stand up. And just as Kev said, he thought that Tim, who was our creative director, was going to redesign the Donkey Kong character. I'd also been told that they'd probably get Nintendo to do the music as well. And so I was just putting some temp scores in. So I just designed 3 pieces of music, which, as far as I understood at the time, was just going to be a demo. And they sent it off, and I didn't hear anything back for ages. I know that they'd seen it and they were quite pleased. But again, I got the gig because they liked the music, which was quite a relief, really, and quite handy.
So just your demos were so good that they were like, "Yeah, we can't do any better."
Allegedly, I know they have. Nintendo have teams. Yamamoto-san, who I worked with on Tropical Freeze, he heads up the external audio team, and they have about 22 or 23 people just doing audio for external teams who work for Nintendo. So I'm sure they probably had something back in the day that was quite similar. So I was always under the impression that they would do this, but fortunately they liked the demo and let me get on with it, which was quite nice. At the time I had this keyboard, it was an Ensoniq TS12, and Robin, he was using this thing called a Korg Wave Station, and I desperately wanted the Super NES to sound like these sound modules, and they had megabytes of data in there, and I had 64K. So I had to rethink how I did things, and I had a brainwave when cycling home one day that because I was still typing everything in hex, it was all coded in as we'd done it in the 8-bit day. But because of that, I could write some routines and take bits of sound and piece them all together, and that's how I managed to generate the sound. So it sounded quite different from all the other scores that were on the Super NES. And again, I was so aware that I needed to pull something out of the bag that matched the quality of the graphics, and I think it was knowing that kind of drove me to try and better the music for the Super NES, which I'm quite glad we spent the time doing. Really,
it occurs to me, you mentioned the 3D graphics being so good, you have to get the music that good. It occurs to me that the music kind of sounds more 3D than other soundtracks too. Like in both senses, both graphically and musically, you just have more dimensions, I think, than you had really seen from a Super Nintendo game up till that point.
I guess so. And also the way we all worked in separate. Well, I was in a converted cowshed, and it didn't have any windows. And
very nice
window. Yes, it was as cowsheds go.
It's not as bad as it sounds.
When you phrase it like that, it sounds
like the cows had been evacuated at that point.
They had. Fortunately, they'd long gone. And
even before we moved.
Yeah, all I had was a window that was quite high and on a slant in the roof, and that was it. So I couldn't actually see anything out of the room. I was almost, I felt as though, looking back, as though I'd been locked in a room for a year just to create music. And so we didn't really have much to compare it with. All I knew is that I wanted it to sound like my keyboards, which I enjoyed playing and creating sounds on. And if you go back and listen to, say, the Ensoniq TS12, Life in the Mines is really based on trying to create one of the pads that was, or one of the sounds that was in this keyboard. I was just trying to emulate that sound for it. So that's where it came from. I wasn't really listening to anything else by comparison. I was just trying to make my comparison with these great synths that were around at the time, and I wanted it to sound like those. So that's probably why. Just isolation, really.
So this just has me thinking about how there have been efforts to sort of go back and resample a lot of the synths that you used.
I've seen that. I think that there's a guy called Sam Miller who.
Yeah.
But it wasn't written that way. It wasn't. I did a conversion from a higher sample thing. I only had 64K, so I was sampling I had a Roland keyboard, an Alpha Juno 2, and I'd set the resonance, and then I'd use the cutoff filter. And that's what makes something bright. So you have a sound that goes wow like that. So it gets dull and then it gets bright. So I'd sample the same waveform at different intensities of brightness, and then that's how I got the filter sweeps. But each one of those, I was working with the palette that was the SNES. There was never a higher sample thing that ever sounded any better. So for me, the actual one that you hear on the Super NES was as high as it ever needed to get, and that was the palette I was working with. So it's not like you'd ever get any better sounds or any higher quality sounds. That they were the sounds or the palette I was working with.
So I feel like Donkey Kong Country kind of, and of course, the fighting game demo, which in a way I'm assuming became Killer Instinct. I mean, it seems like it kind of kicks Rare off into the sort of new 3D era with the N64. And just to circle back to where we were, you worked on a few titles, Donkey Kong 64, Diddy Kong Racing, and you ultimately start working on this dinosaur planet concept. So Kev, you kind of set the stage for us a little bit on what the game was, but what you write about in your article is that essentially you had this project, Dinosaur Planet, for the N64. It was in development properly. It was a product that Nintendo was slated to start marketing, and they kind of stopped you at E3 that year to change plans on you, right?
Yeah. Well, we got a brilliant relationship with Nintendo at the time because of Diddy Kong Racing and DK. And I mentioned it the other day that it never really occurred to us when we well, really, I suppose it's important to know why there was a similarity that sort of kicked off the change. And also, first of all, I just want to say I wasn't the lead on the team. I was the lead artist, but there was a great designer, Lee Schuneman, on there, and we were discussing what to do with the game. And when we decided to add a second character to play, the second character was Crystal, which was this fox character. It's Arctic Fox. And when we were still in the early stages, we thought that a tiger and a fox, it doesn't really match up. They're not from the same real environment. And so we decided to change the main character, Timber, to this wolf, like a masculine version, a beefier version of this athletic fox character, which was Crystal. And we named him Saber, just as a nod to Saberwolf, which was the title from one of the Ultimate games way back in the day. And so we changed the character, and by that time things were starting to get quite established in the way that they were looking. We'd got the villain general scales, and we'd got some more artists on the team. It was very good. It was a guy called Johnny Christensen who modeled the Saber character, and then I took care of a lot of the dinosaurs and